Hey guys, what's up? My name is Public, and today I'm bringing you the patch 7.2.5 Shadow Priest guide. In this video, we're going to go over talents, rotation, gearing, all kinds of things. If you want to skip around to different sections, you can go to the links in the description. Alright, so before we get started, I want to go over what has changed. Notably, what's changed in patch 7.2.5. 7.2 didn't change a whole lot. So the main things that have changed are Mind Blast, Mind Flay, Void Bolt, and Shadow Word Pain all got damage buff increases, and our talent Mindbender also doubled its value in Insanity, which is pretty ridiculous. What this means is basically Shadow is better than it used to be, obviously, and Mindbender is now replacing Power Infusion as that default talent in that row for raiding. Alright, in addition, we have two new legendaries, Heart of the Void, which is our legendary chest, and Soul of the High Priest, which is a legendary class ring that Priest got. I'll go over both of these legendaries and all of our legendaries in the gearing section if you want to learn more about those and where they sit. And then in addition, we also got our new tier 20 in this patch that drops from Tomb of Sargeras. So our 2 set for this tier, our Mind Flay increases the damage of our next Mind Blast by percentage and its Insanity generation as well. And this is a stacking buff, it stacks 10 times. Doesn't really change our playstyle too much. You don't want to play around it at all, but it is a kind of a nice passive increase in that sense. And then our 4-piece for tier 20 is that Insanity drains 10% slower. However, you do want to note that this is only 5% slower if you're taking Surrender to Madness. Essentially, this makes Shadow's Void Forms longer and more consistent, which is a great thing. The Surrender part is kind of meh. It just basically means you don't take Surrender in raids for the most part. And so that's that. Alright, so that's all the changes for Shadow Priest. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how to play your Shadow Priest in a raiding environment. This is not a guide for PvP, questing, or anything else like that, just raiding. We'll cover Mythic Plus in a separate guide coming soon, but without further ado, let's go ahead and get into talents. Alright, so the next thing we're going to cover in this guide is talents. This section actually won't be that long. I'm not going to cover each talent individually. I'm just going to go over what you take for raiding. So a lot of this is pretty cookie cutter. You don't really change things out depending on the fight. So we'll start off. Twist of Fate, default. Body and Soul, Mind Bomb, Lingering Insanity are all default talents. You'll take these all the time. Except with Soul of the High Priest ring, you would want to take Fortress of the Mind, but I'll talk about that more in the Legendary section. As we get into the next tier, normally we had 2 choices, Auspicious Spirits and Sand Lane. Previously we said take Sand Lane all the time. It's usually better depending on your gear. At this point, now that we're not using tier 19, once we get tier 20, at least the 4 set, it does kind of devalue the Mastery build, which was better for Sand Lane. This and other reasons essentially means that Sand Lane is the inferior talent pretty much regardless of builds. So you kind of want to take Auspicious Spirits for everything. Now that being said, once we get really, really high eye levels of gear, I'm talking like 940 equipped, Sand Lane might start to then overpass Auspicious Spirits again. But until we get to that point, it's pretty much going to be Auspicious Spirits, guys. So if there's an update to this, I'll make a new video about that. But at this current moment, pretty much just take AS and go from there. On the next round, like I said before, Mindbender has replaced Power Infusion as our default. So you want to take Mindbender pretty much in all the cases you would have taken Power Infusion, at least for progression rating. There's kind of a case if it's just like a 1 Void Form fight, Power Infusion would probably be better there. But again, this is progression, so we're talking about a whole fight that's several minutes long, so Mindbender is going to be your go-to there. Now, in addition, we also have Misery as an option. There are 2 fights in particular in Tomb of Sargeras that could benefit a little bit from Misery. Kind of depends on your group composition, but I'll throw it out there just in case. Misery could be helpful on Mythic Hard-to-Tan or Mythic Mistress Sajin. It really depends on your group and your comp like that. I'd say for 99% of the people, Mindbender is probably better. But depending on your group and what you need, Misery is there if you need it. So keep that in mind if you're progressing on those bosses in Mythic. I'd say normal and heroic, probably not a concern to take that talent just because of how the fights work. Mythic adds certain mechanics that do make it more valuable to take Misery on those fights. But again, it's kind of a toss-up because you're just reallocating your damage basically. Alright? And as far as level 100 talents, Legacy of the Void is your only choice here. Surrender to Madness is not worth it for progression rating, like I said. If you're talking about a fight that's like so short, it's only 1 or 2 void forms long, so like you're talking like a 90-second fight, surrender might be better there. But outside of that situation, I would take Legacy of the Void. All right, guys, and that does it for our talents. We're going to spend the next big chunk of the guide with our rotation to help you guys through that stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and go into that. All right, guys, in this section, we're going to go over all the rotational elements for Shadow Priest. This is going to be a little hodgepodgey towards the end to kind of do all the little tips and tricks I have for the rotation. If you have any questions about any of this, please leave a comment below, and I'll try and elaborate as much as I can. All right, so first things first, I did say this earlier, but you don't want to change anything I'm about to say because you have the tier 22 set. That doesn't affect our rotation or priority list in any meaningful way, so don't game or try to game yourself around that. All right, just gonna get that out of the way. Now, as far as rotation, there isn't like a set 1, 2, 3, 4 and do this all the time. It's more of a priority list because you'll essentially cast things that come off cooldown at certain points. All right, so that's how Shadow Priest works. We want to build up our insanity, and the goal for Shadow Priest is to get in and stay in void form as much as you can throughout an entire encounter. That doesn't necessarily mean we're trying to get the longest void forms we can one time. It's more about we want to get the longest void forms we can for the entire fight. What I mean by that is if you do a lot of crazy shenanigans to get a very high void form, but the one after that's shorter, that may not be good in all situations. The idea of a lot of this is to make it consistently longer throughout the entire fight, which is exactly what tier 24 set helps you do. All right, so that's our goal. So the first things first, I'll put up this little graphic to help out with this guy. Your rotation out of void form. It's more, like I said, a priority list, but the idea is you want to use Mind Blast on cooldown, keep your dots rolling on the target. You want to use 1 out of your 2 charges of Shadow Word Death, save the other one for void form basically, and then after that it's pretty much filler at this point, which basically means use whatever you can, which normally is just going to be Mind Flay. This could also mean dotting other targets as well. If there are new targets or new ads that come up, you want to use this priority list of when you want to dot those guys. And yeah, in terms of other things, Mind Flay for the most part will pass Mind Blast in priority once you have, I believe, more than 4 targets around that. So for raiding, that doesn't happen a whole lot, except on maybe Mistress or things like that when you have a lot of cleave targets to get that extra insanity bump. But other than that, the whole goal of this is just to get into void form as fast as you can. All right, and that's pretty much it here. Now, as we roll into our in void form rotation, this one is where it starts to get a little tricky because now we can start using our cooldowns. So basically, the idea with this is now that we're in void form, we have 2 new spells, Void Torrent and Void Bolt. The idea is we want to use these on cooldown as much as possible. So the first thing we're going to do, if you're still using tier 19 4-piece, you're going to spam Void Bolts at the start of your void form until that buff expires. So, but that only applies, like I said, if you have tier 19 4-piece. If you don't, you're going to use your first global on Mind Flay and then go into Void Bolt. And then right after that, you're going to want to Void Torrent. All right. So with that said, you do want to Void Torrent on cooldown as fast or as soon as you can, just because this usually means using it on cooldown that you'll get maximum usage out of it. Technically speaking, it is better to delay it only if it doesn't sacrifice your use of the cooldown. So what I mean by that is, let's say you delay casting Void Torrent until 30 stacks, so 30 seconds of your void form. Well, that means you've lost 30 seconds of the cooldown, essentially. And so if you do that twice, that means you've lost an entire cast of Void Torrent throughout the fight. So for that reason, you pretty much don't want to delay Void Torrent if you can help it. Obviously, if you have to move or handle mechanic, you can't cast Void Torrent. It's okay to delay it in that case, but you want to use Void Torrent on cooldown as your #1 priority. Now after that, like I said, we're going to use Void Bolt on cooldown. This trumps Mind Blast and everything else, in addition to dotting targets. All right, so if a new target comes out and you need to dot it, make sure you're weaving that around your Void Bolt usage. That's the key here. So continuing on the priority list, let's start from the beginning. We have Void Torrent on cooldown, then Void Bolt on cooldown. Then we wanted to use our Mind Blast on cooldown, just like before. And then Shadow Word Death, use these kind of sparingly. For the most part, you don't want to use 2 charges of Shadow Word Death back to back. You can let one recharge and only use the second one when you absolutely need it. That same strategy will work for the legendary belt as well. You kind of just want to use that second charge when you need it, not necessarily on cooldown there. And then at the very end, like I said, we have our filler just like before, where this is Mind Flay or dotting other targets and things like that. So the main goal you want to get out of this is that you want to fit 2 spells or 2 GCDs in between each Void Bolt below 140% haste. Now I have pretty low haste on my character just because of the way gear is been given to me, but I still hit this occasionally. But I'll say most of the time I'm underneath this threshold, so it's pretty much Void Bolt, 2 spells, Void Bolt for the most of the rotation. That's kind of a little box of how you want to do that. You'll find little windows where it's like Void Bolt's almost on cooldown. Do I wait to cast Void Bolt or do I cast a spell? The answer to that question is pretty much, have you already used 2 GCDs in between your Void Bolt? If yes, then yeah, go ahead and wait because the window's going to be small enough. If not, that means, yeah, window's too big. You probably want to cast Mind Flay or something in that spot. Now above 140% haste, it's only 1 GCD in between every Void Bolt. That's pretty much the only change. Alright, and as far as our priority list, that pretty much covers it. So the rest of this is kind of more tips and tricks and how we use our cooldowns effectively. Of course, the main cooldown that I haven't touched on yet is Mindbender. So here, we only want to use Mindbender in Void form. That's the key. And depending on if you have tier 24 set, it will change when you want to use this. So before you have tier 24 set, you're going to want to use Mindbender around 20 to 25 stacks. The key here is use it when you need the insanity. The damage output from Mindbender isn't the important part here. It's the insanity generation you're getting from it. So before 4-piece, usually around 20 to 25 stacks is when you start, reaching that your insanity bar is like halfway full and it's kind of getting to the danger zone, I guess. And that's when you're going to want to use Mindbender. While Mindbender is up, you're going to have a much easier time staying in Void form and things like that. And then with tier 24 set, just bump that up about 5 stacks. So you can use it, generally speaking, between 25 and 30. However, I'd say 30 is a pretty comfortable number you can hit, especially if you have Lust on Pull. So what I mean by that is, if you start out a fight, you'll usually have Lust on Pull. You can Mindbender around 30-ish stacks, and then from then on out, you're basically going to be using Mindbender on cooldown. And the way that works out, you pretty much will get Void Torrent and Mindbender every Void form if you're consistent in what you do. Don't, forego and cast Mindbender super early or super late. Usually that'll end up hurting you. You want to cast it at the right time to get the most benefit out of it. Now that being said, you can delay this slightly depending on the procs that you have. Like if you have tentacles that have come out or, different things like that, you can delay it slightly. However, it's not usually a very consistent thing to do. So for instance, let's say you're on the Bloodlust opener and you get a 2 tentacle procs at 30 stacks or something silly. Yeah, maybe you could delay until 35 stacks, but the problem with doing that in some cases is that your next Void form, your Mindbender either won't be off cooldown when you need it, or it'll be way early, which isn't necessarily what you want either. So you kind of want to weigh that option. And the same goes for trying to reach a 2 Void Torrent Void form. That usually means your second Void form after that is a little behind. In general, you want to prefer a more consistent output when you're doing your Void forms. Now that being said, if it's your last Void form of the fight, you can do a little kind of tricky things because it's your last one. If you want to do that, go for it. You can delay Void Torrent a bit if you know it's your last Void Torrent, things like that. But again, that's only if you know that it's the last one of the fight. Alright, so the idea, like I said, you want to get Void Torrent and Mindbender off with each Void form. That's not really possible before tier 24 sets, so don't be discouraged if you're having trouble with that. And before that, if you do notice a kind of a desyncing thing, you can try and use, dispersion for 1 or 2 seconds only, not the full 6 seconds, just to sync yourself back up with Mindbender. So you kind of use that as a tool. Once you get 4 set, you really don't have that problem, or if you get a high enough haste, you don't have that problem, so keep that in mind, alright? So that covers Mindbender. I know that's a lot, but if you have questions, like I said, please leave a comment below. Alright, so with other things that we can cover here, like I said before, if you have tier 20, you'll notice a desync more often. That is normal. And another key thing you want to worry about on your Shadow Priest is proccing Twist of Fate. What this means is you need to be looking for mobs to dot. You need to be looking for mobs to cast Shadow or Death on throughout the fight. to get the most usage out of your Shadow Priest. So keep that in mind as you're DPSing on a fight. You always want to dot things if you can. As far as when to dot things, generally speaking, you want to cast Shadow Word Pain on them if they're going to live longer than a couple seconds. And then you want to cast Vampiric Touch only if they're going to live considerably longer, more probably greater than or equal to 7 or 8 seconds. And you can kind of gauge that depending on the fight when you're progressing on it and things like that. So be sure to look out for that. It's a very easy thing to separate a good Shadow Priest from a great Shadow Priest. All right. And guys, that pretty much covers the rotation section. Like I said, I know that's a lot. We're going to move on to gearing next on how to optimize your build as much as you can. All right. All right, guys, the next big section we're going to cover in this guy is gearing. So gearing is a very complicated issue. There's a lot of tools to help us do it, though, so don't worry too much. Our basic stat priority for this patch is going to be haste, crit, then mastery, which is pretty much equal to versatility, and then intellect as our worst stat. Still good for us, but it just, in comparison, isn't the greatest. So that's our basic stat priority that you can follow. So you want to focus on getting haste, crit pieces as much as you can. But moreover, haste is what you really want. There isn't necessarily a haste cap. I've seen a lot of people say that in the Discords and things like that. You pretty much just want to get as much haste as you can right now. A way to kind of help you do that, there will be pawn strings in the description post below to kind of help you decide when something's an upgrade versus not. If you're not sure what pawn is, we did a guide or video walkthrough of this a while ago. It's still pretty much up to date, so you can check that guy out. Now, as far as that goes, that's a very general way of figuring out if you have an upgrade for something. I know a lot of other classes and things like that tell you to sim yourself to figure out if things are an upgrade. Shadow Priest has done a lot of work to make it so that isn't as necessary. We do a lot of sims over different fight weights and things like that for Tomb of Sargeras stuff specifically to make sure you don't have to do that if you don't want to. However, if you want to sim yourself to the same degree of I guess specificness that we're doing, you can use a tool called Magic Sim, which essentially does 36 sims over your character and does stat weights for that. It's a very personalized way of getting stat weights using our methodology. Takes considerably longer than doing the normal patchwork stat weights that you've probably been used to with other classes, but it's a lot more accurate for Tomb of Sargeras. So if you're convinced you need to sim yourself to figure out if things are an upgrade, you can use Magic Sim. Otherwise, if that stuff isn't for you, you can just use our weights. They're pretty accurate for most things, all right? That should cover, as far as stats go, that. There isn't necessarily a perfect balance of that that's, you know, way higher than the others. The idea is just use the pawn strings or, you know, Magic Sim to determine your point with your gear, okay? With that being said, we're going to go ahead and cover the artifact path next. With 7.2, it brought us our ability to empower our artifact, which gives all of our 3 out of 3 traits the ability to go up to 4 out of 4. We also had some new traits in addition to Concordance of the Legion Fall. So I have a graphic coming up now. This is the basic path that you want to follow to put your new points in if you haven't already. I'll kind of assume, like I said with this, you've already empowered your artifact. If you haven't yet and you're just starting out your Shadow Priest, have no fear. You basically just want to do the path with your gold traits. You want to pick up the Mass Hysteria one first, then take the path to Call of the Void, and then Sphere of Insanity will be the last one that you pick up. If you want a more specific guide, it'll be linked in the description as far as the pathing goes. With that being said, that's pretty much it for our artifact, other than our legendaries, or sorry, not legendaries, relics. So in your artifact, you put relics inside of them. You can see the relic chart coming up now that we just ran. Basically, more or less what this means is you want to get a Fiending Dark relic. Right now there's only one in the game, and it drops from Kill Jaden in Tomb of Sargeras. This trait's very good, scales very well with us, so it's several more stacks of Void Form essentially is what that's giving you, which is very powerful. You can drop a few eye levels for this if you need to, but not a whole lot. Just use the chart. If you need more walkthrough of how to do that, you can click the link in the description as far as the relic post goes to get more in-depth look at that. Other than that, the relics you want to shoot for are the Shadow Damage relic, the Shadow Word Pain relic, and Vampiric Touch relic. Alright, so that covers our artifact, and next we're going to talk about legendaries. So I'm going to divide these up into 3 tiers. Top and kind of a meh tier, and then our bottom tier legendaries. So the top tier legendaries that you want for Tomb of Sargeras are the Belt, Cephas Secret, and our legendary Shoulders. The spec-specific ones, not the crafted ones. So these three are very, very good, especially Cepha's Secret. Even if you can't proc Cepha's, it's probably better than every other legendary right now, according to the work that I've done. So in Tomb of Sargeras, you're pretty safe to use Cepha's on every single boss right now. And the belt pretty much fills the exact same role. It's just very good single target. Tomb is a lot of single targets, so it's just good overall. And then we also have the legendary shoulders, which basically means our dots tick harder all the time. And it kind of just ramps up faster is the idea. It's just consistently good. It gets better on multi-target for sure. So it kind of depends on the fight. You could theoretically swap out belt and shoulders depending on the fight, but again, you don't want to sacrifice a tier bonus for a legendary. Our tier 20 is, generally speaking, better than a legendary. So using the shoulders means you can't use the shoulders tier, which is fine. Shoulders tier is probably our worst piece anyways, which kind of helps the value of the shoulders, but keep that in mind. So this is kind of our top tier. The next one, for rating, these next guys are okay. They're not the best DPS output, but they're still very, very solid choices. And that leaves us with our new legendary chest, which increases the damage bar of Void Eruption by a ton. This gets better the more targets there are for sure. It's a great legendary for dungeons. But as far as rating, it's kind of meh. The only great part about it is that it has amazing stats, our two best ones in fact. So that's what kind of pulls this guy up there. We also have the legendary cloak, which is great for single target. Pride As, which is not only a pretty solid DPS increase just because of how much stats it gives us, and we love stats, but it's also great for progression rating as well. So using this is actually really nice. If a boss is really hitting your raid team hard, you can swap to this for a very minimal DPS loss while still helping out your healers. So, and with that same mindset, the legendary helm does a very similar thing. Gives us a solid DPS increase, while also giving you a little bit of a healing throughput option as well. So it makes this one pretty solid. And we'll put the wrists in here as well. They lost a lot of value, mainly because Tomb isn't very multi-target heavy. There are a few fights where it could be better, but again, even on those fights like Inquisition, I probably would not use the wrists over the belt or Cepha's. Again, that's just my opinion. It's kind of where I put these guys, all right? And then we have the bottom tier of legendaries. These guys are not very useful in a raiding environment, in my opinion, and as such, you probably won't see them very often. The first one on this list is Twins Painful Touch. This is a little controversial, I'm sure, but in my opinion, the Twins Ring playstyle is very opposite of what you want to do with your Shadow Priest. You can use it in certain situations, but it might only be good for part of the fight, not the entire fight. And when I pick a legendary, I want it to help for the entire fight if it possibly can. So that's why I put it down here. The playstyle is just really weird as well. It kind of hurts you elsewhere. And now that with tier 20, our void forms are longer, your opportunity to use the ring has gone down significantly. So in general, this is why it's a bottom tier legendary. We also have our new ring, which is Soul of the High Priest. And this is in the bottom tier purely because it's not good unless it's paired with something else. What I mean by that is when you take the Soul of the High Priest ring, you're going to take Fortress of the Mind, which in turn makes the legendary belt a little better as well. So if you don't have Cepha's, pairing Soul of the High Priest and the belt is actually a really good combo for pure single target. So kind of keep that in mind if you're still working on getting all the legendaries, that's a great option for you. However, in my opinion, Cepha's is better in every other case. For the most part, other than pure single target, it can be kind of iffy. But again, as soon as you add movement into the mix, you will see Soul of the High Priest ring go down. You'll see Fortress go down, where Cepha's is still good, if not better there. So it's kind of a toss-up there. In my opinion, though, Soul of the High Priest is really only good on pure single target when you're not moving with the belt. It's a very specific scenario, which is why it's on the bottom tier. And if I wasn't clear before, you do not take Shadow Word Void with this ring. Fortress is better in every case, okay? And the last two that are here are the Crafted Shoulders. Just doesn't give us any throughput effect. The stats are good, yes, but we already have legendary shoulders that are pretty decent wise, so why would you use these? And then last but not least is Kil'jaeden's Burning Wish in the bottom tier. It's just not very useful for raiding, especially in Tomb of Sargeras. We have really, really good trinkets, so replacing any of those with Kil'jaeden's is just kind of weird, especially in a mostly single target environment, okay? So that covers legendaries for us. Like I said, if you have questions, leave them in the comments below. Real quick, we will cover trinkets. I usually don't talk too much about trinkets, but I will say if you are trying to target certain trinkets, just get stuff from Tomb of Sargeras. All of the TOS trinkets are very, very powerful. Essentially, the top three are going to be Spectral Owl, which is the Tarnished Sentinel Medallion off of Sisters. Spectral Thurible, which is off of Desolate Host, is very good. And the Terror Trinket, the Shark, that drops off of Mistress. These three are very, very solid in almost every situation. In addition, the trinket that drops off of Kill Jaden and the Haste Trinket are okay. They're generally speaking better than our other trinkets that we have available to us, but not as good as the three I mentioned before. So those are the guys that you want to shoot for. As far as enchants go, I'll cover these real quick. You just want haste everywhere, including on your neck. Before we're using Trained Soldier as our neck enchant, you want to swap to Mark of the Claw now, just because of how good haste is. It's pretty close overall, so it's not a big deal if you prefer the consistency of Mark of Trained Soldier, but Claw is technically better. All right. So that pretty much covers gearing, guys. If you have any questions about that, please leave them in the comments below. Okay. All right, guys, that covers it for this guide for patch 725 Shadow Priest in raiding. So I hope this has helped you learn Shadow Priest or pick up something new. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Like I said, you can also check me out on Twitch. I stream as much as I can. I try to get all of our raids in there, and I also have VODs and that kind of thing on my Twitch channel and things like that, so check that out. And if you're interested in more Shadow Priest content, just stay tuned to the channel. Like I said, we have Mythic Plus guide coming, lots of Shadow Priest stuff coming, and if anything changes, just stay tuned here, and I'll be around. Also, you can also find me in the How to Priest Discord. I'm there quite often as well, so feel free to reach out there as well. Okay, guys? That's it for this one. Thanks for watching.